Come closer, my little star, and let the velvet folds of the quilt wrap around you like a warm embrace. The world outside has tucked itself into bed. The trees are standing still as sentinels, and the moon has begun its slow silver climb across the vast, ink-dark sky. Tonight, the stars are whispering secrets to the clouds, and if you listen very carefully, you might just hear the echo of a story that has traveled through the ages, carried on the wings of the night wind. It is a tale of a young man named Elias, and of the day he discovered that when you open your heart to the smallest of creatures, the entire universe begins to speak in a language of wonder. Many, many years ago, there stood a magnificent castle known as the Citadel of Whispers. It was a marvel of architecture, built from pale pearlescent stone that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Its slender, soaring towers pierced the clouds, reaching for the stars like fingers of alabaster, while the vast stained glass windows acted as prisms, capturing the sunlight and scattering it across the cold marble floors in a kaleidoscope of dancing rainbows. The castle was cradled by gardens so immense that one could wander for days and never tread the same path twice. There were blue lilies that shimmered with a soft bioluminescent glow in the twilight, and ancient rose bushes whose blossoms smelled of cinnamon, spiced honey, and the very essence of a summer afternoon. Within these hallowed walls lived a king, a man of profound and shadowed wisdom, said to possess the ability to discern the truth of a heart before a single word was uttered. Elias was a humble servant in this sprawling, echoing house. He was a lad of quiet grace, moving through the draughty, vaulted hallways with the soft-footed silence of a woodland creature. Every day, as the sun began to dip below the horizon and the shadows of the pillars stretched across the floor like long, reaching fingers, Elias was entrusted with a task of grave secrecy. He carried a heavy golden dish, shielded by a lid of wrought iron and gold, to the king's private chambers. No one in the castle knew what mystery the dish contained, and the king would always dine in absolute haunting silence behind doors that were barred against the world. One afternoon, as the golden haze of autumn filled the air with a drowsy, dreamlike quality, curiosity, that persistent, itching whisper, took hold of Elias's mind. He retreated to his own small, humble quarters, a cozy nook where the walls were draped in thick, ancient ivy that sighed against the stone. With a trembling hand, he turned the key, click, and took a long, steadying breath. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, curled in a shimmering coil, lay a white snake, its scales glowing like a polished pearl in the dim, flickering light. Entranced by a power he did not understand, Elias took a tiny, hesitant bite. Suddenly, a strange, liquid warmth spread through his veins, and his ears began to tingle with a sharp electric clarity. He walked to the window to steady himself and looked out at the gnarled ancient apple trees. Two sparrows were perched on a low-hanging branch, their feathers ruffled by a gentle, cooling breeze. To his utter amazement, he understood their chirping as clearly as his own name. They were speaking of the Queen's lost diamond ring, a precious heirloom that had been swallowed by a foolish, greedy duck down by the lily pond. Elias leaned against the cool, rough stone of the window frame, his heart racing with newfound wonder. The world was no longer a silent place. The trees were whispering secrets to the rustling wind, and the insects in the tall grass were sharing the news of the meadows in a constant rhythmic chatter. But the next morning, the peace of the castle was shattered. The queen was weeping in the great hall, the sound of her sorrow echoing against the high ceilings, for her favourite ring had vanished. The king's eyes turned upon Elias, cold and hard as winter ice, and he declared that if the thief was not discovered by the next sunrise, the young servant would be cast out forever. Elias felt a freezing shiver of dread, yet he remembered the sparrows and the secret they had shared. He hurried down to the courtyard, where the air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and coming rain. He found a group of ducks resting near a crystal-clear brook. One duck, her white feathers muddied and unkempt, was sighing with a heavy melancholy air. She complained to her companions that she had swallowed something hard and heavy near the queen's window, and that it felt like a stone of sorrow in her belly. Elias gently gathered her into his arms. He was always so careful, treating every living thing with a reverence that was rare in those halls, and took her to the royal cook. When the ring was found, the king was struck by profound regret for his rash anger. He offered Elias any treasure, any title, or any land he desired. But Elias did not care for gold or high positions. He asked only for a sturdy horse and a simple bag of grain, for his soul was yearning to see the vast, magical world beyond the white walls of the citadel. He rode out through the massive iron gates just as the morning mist was beginning to lift from the emerald fields. The world outside was even more breathtaking than he had imagined in his quiet room. He rode through valleys where the grass was so lush and deep it looked like woven silk, and over hills where the wind played haunting melodies through the purple heather. By midday, he reached a secluded pond, its surface undisturbed and glassy, surrounded by weeping willows that dipped their long branches into the water. The summer heat had caused the pond to retreat, leaving 3 silver fish trapped in the drying, muddy reeds. They were gasping, their scales losing their luster. Elias immediately dismounted, feeling the soft velvet moss beneath his boots. He knelt in the cool mud and, with hands as gentle as a lullaby, scooped up the slippery, shimmering fish and placed them back into the deep, refreshing blue of the pond. They flicked their tails in gratitude, looking up at him with bright, intelligent eyes, promising they would never forget the hand that had saved them. He continued his journey until the path turned into soft golden sand that sparkled like crushed sunbeam. Beneath his horse's hooves, he heard a tiny, frantic and high-pitched voice. It was the Ant King, crying out in terror as his people were threatened by the heavy, thundering feet of the horse. Elias immediately pulled his mount to the side, carefully navigating the narrow, grassy verge to ensure not a single ant was harmed. The Ant King stood upon a tiny grain of sand, bowing low, and promised that one day he would return the favor in kind. As the sun began to set, painting the horizon in bruised violets, burning apricots and soft rose, Elias entered an ancient primeval forest. The pines were so towering they seemed to hold up the very stars, their branches forming a dark, protective ceiling. He soon saw 2 old ravens, their feathers like charcoal against the sky, pushing their young from a high, precarious nest. The fledglings were shivering on the damp, mossy ground, their wings too weak to carry them, crying that they would surely starve in the coming night. Elias looked at his meagre bag of food. He knew he had a long road ahead, but he could not abandon them. He spread his bread and grain upon the forest floor, staying by their side until the little birds were fed, warm, and strong enough to hop back into the safety of the lower branches. They croaked their thanks into the darkening woods, a sound of loyalty that promised he would never be truly alone. Finally, after many days of travel, Elias reached a magnificent city perched on the edge of a vast sapphire sea. The palace here was a testament to wonder, built from coral and gold, and it belonged to a princess who was as beautiful as a summer morning, yet as proud and inaccessible as a mountain peak. She had declared that any man who wished to claim her hand must first pass 3 impossible tests. The first test was to retrieve a ring the king had cast into the deepest, darkest part of the ocean. Elias stood upon the shore, watching the white foam of the waves as they crashed against the rocks. The sea was vast, churning, and infinite, and he felt small, like a speck of dust in the eye of a giant. But suddenly 3 silver shapes broke the surface, sparkling in the moonlight. It was his friends, the fish. They swam to the shore and placed a delicate, iridescent shell at his feet. Inside, gleaming with a trapped light, was the golden ring. The princess was astonished, yet her pride remained unyielding. For the second test, she scattered 10 great sacks of tiny millet seeds across the dark, tangled grass of the palace gardens. They must all be gathered by dawn, she commanded, her voice cold as marble. Elias sat on a stone bench as the owls began to hoot in the ancient trees. The task was surely impossible for human hands. But then he heard a rustling in the leaves, a soft, sweeping sound like the tide. Thousands upon thousands of ants emerged from the shadows, a living carpet of industry. They worked in perfect, silent unison, their tiny legs moving with a speed that defied the eye. By the time the first ray of pink morning light touched the palace roof, every single seed had been returned to the sacks. Still, the princess was not satisfied. She demanded one last thing, a golden apple from the tree of life. Elias did not know where such a tree grew, but he set out once more. He wandered through 3 different kingdoms. One where the flowers sang melodies of old. One where the rain fell in shimmering colours. And one where the trees were crafted from delicate, translucent glass. He walked until his boots were worn thin and his spirit was heavy with weariness. One evening, he lay down to rest in a glade filled with glowing, rhythmic fireflies. Just as he was drifting into sleep, he heard the heavy, powerful beat of wings. His 3 raven friends landed beside him, their black feathers shining like dark silk in the moonlight. In their beaks, they carried a heavy glowing apple that smelled of every wonderful cherished memory Elias had ever known. They had flown to the very edge of the world to retrieve it for him, out of pure, undying gratitude. Elias returned to the palace and presented the golden apple. He and the princess sat together in the garden as the sun set, turning the world to gold. They cut the apple in 2 and ate it, and as they did, a wave of profound peace and ancient wisdom washed over them. The princess looked at Elias and for the first time truly saw him, not as a servant, but as a soul filled with courage, humility, and deep compassion. Her pride melted away like morning mist, replaced by a love as vast and deep as the sapphire sea. They were married in the great cathedral of the city, and the wedding feast lasted for 7 glorious days. The birds sang from the high rafters, the fish leaped in the fountains, and the ants were given a private garden of their own where no one would ever disturb their labor. Elias and his princess lived in perfect happiness, and they always ensured that in their kingdom the smallest voice was heard, the humblest creature was protected, and kindness remained the highest law of the land. And so, my dear, the fire is burning low, casting dancing shadows upon the walls. Remember that kindness is the strongest, most enduring magic of all. It can cross the deepest oceans, move the heaviest mountains, and turn the simplest heart into one fit for a king. Now, close your eyes, let the weight of the day drift away, and let the stars guide you to your own magical kingdom. Good night, little one. Sleep tight.